Well, for the rest of the hour, Lord Christopher Monckton, 3rd Viscount of Monckton and Brenchley, worked at the highest levels of the UK government at 10 Downing Street with one of the chief advisors to then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. You can find out more about his bio by visiting his website. We'll give that out again repeatedly before he leaves us. But some stations just joined us recapping. Lord Monckton, tell us about yourself. You've been talking about this for more than a decade, and now what ClimateGate means, the different sectors of fraud, and how you believe from your perspective this should be prosecuted.
For those who haven't come across ClimateGate, this was the release of a large number of emails between about 24 malevolent, crooked scientists right at the top of the climatological tree. These are the people who, between them, have conspired to invent and then maintain the scare of global warming. And the emails came from the University of East Anglia's Climatic Research Centre, which specializes in calculating the global temperature record for the whole world over the last 150 years since we first began having what one might call global instrumental coverage with thermometers all over the world. And it's quite a complex process because very few of the temperature stations remain in the same place for any length of time. They come in and out, some work, some stop working, some don't report properly, some don't report at all. Whole chunks of Russia disappeared in 1990 when the Berlin Wall came down. So it's very difficult actually to make sense of all this data. But unfortunately what they were doing at the Climate Research Centre with active assistance from many other climate scientists around the world was they were simply making up the 20th century record of temperatures. So we don't even know how much warmer it has got over the 20th century. We know, broadly speaking, it's got warmer because it's been getting warmer for 300 years, nothing to do with us. But we didn't know how much. And the whole idea of having this very elaborate international network of temperature stations with people going and looking in little boxes and making a note of the temperature every day and then phoning their local weather bureau and that then being passed on to just 2 or 3 places around the world, of which East Anglia was one where they compile these records. This was an enormously elaborate piece of work. And then when it got to East Anglia and the 2 American universities where this was processed, what they did then, as we now know because we've seen their computer code and we've seen their data, they didn't store the data properly. They didn't keep it in an organized form. They didn't know by the end of it what their own computer programs were doing, but they were processing all of the data several times over, and it had become a complete mess. And essentially, they were simply making up the temperature increases of the last 20 years. It is simply a fiction. It's science fiction.
Well, expanding on that, and of course you obviously have read the emails, they talk about temperatures are dropping. How do we fix it? How do we spin it? How do we hide the decline? And then, of course, there's the whole area of how they're talking about keeping people out of journals, persecuting journals, blocking FOIA requests, working with government officials to block this information from the public. I mean, this is racketeering.
It is racketeering. I think it is nicely covered by your RICO statute. And funny enough, we have just put a new act on the statute book a few years ago called the Fraud Act. And this is fraud on our side of the Atlantic and racketeering, as you would call it, on yours. These are people who deserve to go to prison for a very long time. And I'll tell you why I'm so angry about it, because this is a point that's nearly always forgotten in all the commentaries about climate change, that global warming isn't killing anyone and it isn't going to kill anyone. What is killing people, and killing them by the million of starvation now, is the effects of the global warming scare. Because many nations, including the United States, have taken up to a third of their agricultural land out from growing food for people who needed it to growing biofuels for clunkers that didn't. And that has meant in the last year or two a doubling, and I mean a doubling, of world food prices. And the World Bank says that nearly all of that doubling of world food prices is directly attributable to the biofuel scam, which in turn is directly caused by the global warming scare, and governments saying, well, even if it isn't true, we've got to take precautions. But you have to remember, you also have to take precautions to check that the precautions you're taking are not killing people by the million, which is what this policy of biofuels is actually doing.
And by the way,
all of this scare comes out from these idiots and these crooks and these criminals. I'm very sorry, I'm not kind of keeping my normal calm self here.
No, please.
I am so incandescent with fury that these people whom we as British taxpayers and you as American taxpayers have been paying to do this work, and we have been trusting them to do it right. They have simply not only been making it up, but as you rightly say, they have been tampering with the peer review process, trying to interfere with reviewers to persuade them to pass or not to pass papers they didn't like. They've been trying to bully journal editors whom they don't like into resigning and getting the boards of the papers to appoint, the learned journals to appoint somebody else more agreeable to them. They've been interfering with the process of the UN's climate panel itself by saying in one case, here are two papers we don't like because they show that we're wrong. We will make sure that these papers do not ever get anywhere near the UN's climate report for 2007, even if we have to redefine the peer review process in order to do it. That's how far they've gone, to bend the entire process of scientific research at every level, from the gathering of the data, to the storage of the data, to the processing of the data, to making the data available to other people, to writing up the data, to doing the papers explaining what it means, calculating the temperatures, putting the papers in the peer-reviewed journals, trying to interfere with the peer-reviewed journals, interfering with the process of the UN's climate panel itself. It is a conspiracy from top to bottom, run by extremely powerful scientists who had got away for decades with challenging anyone who dared to argue with them by saying, you're not a scientist, you don't know what you're talking about, we're not going to pay any attention to you. They've said that to me and about me time and again. They describe me in one of their emails as a charlatan. Well, I don't mind insults, but these people are charlatans themselves. Pot calls kettle black. These people deserve to be locked up, and locked up for a very, very, very long time, and never, ever again to be allowed to hold any position of public trust or be paid a single penny of taxpayers' money.
Well, Lord Monckton, that's the point, is there's so much fraud as I sit here and research it, saying that polar bears couldn't swim when they're the greatest land swimmer and hunt on the ice floes, and their numbers have exploded. Fact, local news in Austin last night said the polar bears are all dying. Total fraud. Lying with the hockey stick. Al Gore putting the graph together, knowing that carbon dioxide comes after warming, lying about that. And then saying all scientists agreed with them and pointing to their 2,500 pets when it was only 3 universities, as you pointed out, producing the fraud. The others just signed on to the fraud, believing it. Then we have them calling people climate deniers, saying people need to be locked up who disagree with them, clearly authoritarian. I mean, this is outrageous. And now the U.S. climate czar in the Washington Times says hacked emails don't change anything. And I've seen London Guardian articles where they're whining, talking about how you and others are persecuting the poor scientist when they're in the emails talking about how to persecute you.
That's right. And I'm going to go on persecuting them, if that's the way they like to call it. I am going to go on because whether they like it or not, and they've done more than anyone to try to stop the world continuing to be free, well, we've had people like James Hansen, you've just quoted him, saying that people like me should be placed on trial for high crimes against humanity. Hey, I'm not the person killing people by starvation worldwide because of mad policies based on bad science. That's what they're doing. And they have got to go on trial for high crimes against humanity because what they have been doing is they have been recklessly and deliberately making up science, falsifying science, then doing their best to use the cover of the Data Protection Act and government privilege to prevent people from, other scientists from legitimately asking to get the data which they've then said they would destroy rather than giving it out. It is at every level a howling outrage. How we deal with it, I think that there are going to have to be prosecutions on this side of the Atlantic, indictments on your side. People are going to have to go to jail and be put on trial, not only for fraud, but I think we're going to need to send some of them to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, because so many people are dying in the poorest countries as a direct result of the lunatic policies being pursued by half-witted governments peopled with scientifically illiterate and innumerate thickos who don't know any science, and therefore they have a kind of white coat syndrome. A scientist comes along and tells them something, and they simply believe it, particularly if it happens to suit their political predilection, which means on the whole it's much easier to persuade the left of the nonsense these people have been peddling than it is the right, who tend to be more sceptical of this kind of thing.